Welcome everybody to the Energy Day of Scientists Warning Europe's Pre-COP Planet in Crisis. Today the title is Inspiring Action on Community Energy Schemes. The talk will be given by Peter Capener. And as we've done on all of the other talks, we're starting by reading out the section on energy relevant to today from the World Scientists Climate Emergency Warning, which was actually issued on the 5th of November last year, so almost exactly a year before now, and exactly a year before COP26. So the world scientists said, the world must quickly implement massive energy efficiency and conservation practices and must replace fossil fuels with low carbon renewables and other cleaner sources of energy if safe for people and the environment. We should leave remaining stocks of fossil fuels in the ground and should carefully pursue effective negative emissions using technology, such as carbon extraction from the source and capture from the air, and especially by enhancing natural systems. Wealthier countries need to support poorer nations in transitioning away from fossil fuels. We must swiftly eliminate subsidies for fossil fuels and use effective and fair policies for steadily escalating carbon prices to restrain their use. In addition, it's worth noting that today is the day that America officially leaves the Paris Accord. So a lamentable day for everybody around the world, particularly all the world scientists that would say that that was an essential part of trying to get the world onto the right path. I think probably everybody here and everybody who's involved in climate and environmental and biodiversity issues will hope that the right person wins in America and we can get America back into the Paris Accord. But we should all be doing whatever we can to inspire them to go back in the future. So moving over to thank Peter Capener again for coming to talk for us. And Peter is the Managing Director of the Bath and West Community Energy Scheme. Bath and West Community Energy has raised over £9 million through local share offers and has built a 12.35 megawatt of community solar PV and one small hydro scheme. Enough capacity to supply the equivalent annual electricity demand for 4,000 typical homes. Peter is also an independent sustainable energy and communities advisor. He's the non-executive director of Community Energy England, and he's a trustee for the Centre for Sustainable Energy. Peter, we welcome you.
Great, thanks very much, Ed, and I'm really pleased to be here and as part of your wonderful series of talks. Thanks very much for inviting me, and looking forward to the discussion. So let me share my screen, and I'll start off with some slides. Is that, you can see this okay, Ed? Somebody stick the thumb up.
Yes, it's fine. Yes,
right,
it's fine.
Thank you. I would like to cover a little bit about Bath and West Community Energy, just in terms of our experience, what we've achieved, as a precursor to looking at the role of community energy in the energy transition. And your introduction, Ed, provided a really good context for that. Look at some of the opportunities for action at a community level, what we should be focusing on. And I'd be really interested to hear from the participants whether you're actively involved or interested in getting involved in community energy in the discussion. I'd like to finish looking at some of the issues that we need to address to enable community energy to flourish. I think I'm starting from the point of view where, when we look at community energy at the moment, we see the majority of projects tend to be relatively small scale, focusing on solar panels on schools and community buildings, of which we've done a great deal, and I think excellent types of projects to develop. But I think the case I'd like to make is that in order to maximize the role of community energy, and indeed to really make sure that the energy transition is as rapid as it needs to be, we need to think about community energy in a more holistic way. So Bath and West Community Energy, we started 2010, and like all good community project started off from discussions in a pub in Bath, in this case. Part of a number of community groups came together to think, how can we make renewable energy development in our local area benefit local people, the local area, and ensure that we get maximum take-up and participation as possible. So in 2010, we set up Bath and West with the intention of developing clean local energy, community-owned for the common good. And in order to achieve that, we felt it was really important that the organisation was a community benefit society. It's a form of mutual, like many of the building societies used to be. Importantly, it's a type of co-op, but it's a co-op that is set up specifically to benefit the wider community rather than its members. Democratic, one member, one vote, regardless of shareholding, which means from a governance and accountability point of view, it's very much bedded in the local area on a kind of equal basis. Strong asset lock, which means that we can't be asset stripped effectively for commercial gain, and fundamentally not-for-profit organisation. These are important things we found in creating an organisation that's trusted at a local level and can build consent and participation, which is what we feel is critical to underpinning the energy transition. So our area of interest, Bath in the middle there, covering all of Baines, but also part of West Wiltshire, Bradford-on-Avon, Trowbridge, Corsham, and the eastern part of South Gloss, if you know the area. But when we set up the organisation, we've had a really challenging, difficult kind of issue to address around balancing community scale with scale of delivery. So we need to be small enough to ensure that we retain a degree of community embeddedness. People know us, we have a local presence, but it needs to be a wide enough area to be able to have the potential for generating enough renewable energy to create both a viable community business, but also to meet a substantial amount of local demand. So this is the area we picked. And as Ed was talking about, we've raised 20 million community fundraising and debt from the Ethical Bank Triodos, enough to develop 15 rooftop schemes, 5 larger ground-mounted solar schemes, and 1 small hydro, perfectly formed old water wheel, renovated and generating electricity. Since 2010, we've donated £200,000 back into the local community through our independent community fund, which has supported a wide range of community projects, from share and repair cafes through to schools programs, bike hire schemes, electric bike hire schemes, community orchards, local food projects, a whole wide range of carbon reduction and also fuel poverty alleviation programs that are funded out of the surplus of the projects that we've built. All of which is underpinned by a growing supporters network. So as well as the people who invest in the schemes and are our members, we've built a network of volunteers that are reaching out into their local communities, acting as champions for projects, and actually adding real value from a volunteering perspective on different aspects of our work. So taking a quick step back, before I look at the role, it's important to recognise a couple of things about this energy transition. One, firstly, that it's a massive system change for our energy setup. We're moving from a centralised, large power stations delivering electricity one way down a system to us as the consumers, to a more decentralised system with generation, storage, embedded at the local level alongside electric vehicle charging and the like, meaning that electricity is going two ways, up and down the system. And as consumers, we're also generating electricity. So it's a fundamentally different way of operating and managing the system. And this change is already underway. Regardless of politics, the industry is scaling up for this. Politics will make a difference as to how quickly it happens, but this is happening. And just to emphasize this point, this is a quote which I would, if we were in a meeting, I would ask you who you think kind of said this. We're in the midst of an energy revolution. The economic landscape, developments in technology, evolving business models and consumer behavior are changing at an unprecedented rate. Have a think. Who do you think it was? I doubt whether you would have thought it would be the national grid. We are in a process that is so embedded in this change that the industry, the national grid, the distribution network operators, and even the energy suppliers are gearing up for this outcome. A far cry from when I started working in this sector in the mid-80s, not quite that old, mid-80s, when we had the CEGB and renewable electricity was in fractions of a percent. So this system change requires us, though, to take a very different approach to how we balance supply and demand. No longer can we just rely on the national grid sitting in their offices in head office in Worcester, turning power stations up and down to meet electricity demand when we all turn our kettles on in the middle of the FA Cup final, as was the old cliched example. We're going to have to look at balancing supply and demand at a much local level. And that creates real problems for the system. Alongside this massive change, we need to think about public consent. So we've delivered renewable energy now meeting a third to 40% of our electricity demand, with massive implementation of renewables offshore as well as onshore to get up to the 80%, 90% plus that we need. We're going to need to ramp up onshore implementation in some of the areas that are not so obvious. And it's going to be very difficult to do that without public consent. It's also going to be very difficult to change the way that we all use electricity to balance supply and demand more effectively without public consent. So balancing supply and demand, building public consent are two fundamental principles behind this system change. So this is happening, but up for question is how quickly is it going to happen? And importantly, who's going to own this transition? Is it going to be the incumbents, the existing large energy suppliers, with all the baggage that they bring around trust or the lack of it? The energy supply sector is one of the lowest trust, lowest sectors of the economy when it comes to trust, down there with well, I won't mention any other sectors in case I have any other representatives here, but low trust levels. So who's going to own this transition? And I and many other people in our sector suggest that there is a different way of doing business. How do we own? What do we own? Where's the benefits and who controls? The three fundamental questions that I think community energy provides an answer to. So who owns the infrastructure? And indeed, beyond that, who owns and controls the programs and services that we offer? Our view is that community enterprise is a fundamental part of this. So community enterprise can provide accountability and local governance that enables us to draw in local people and inspire and empower local people to take action, as well as recycling benefit from these projects back into local communities. Who controls? It's local people. And who benefits? It's the community through not just the Community Benefit Fund by building, but by also building greater resilience at a community level with community assets rather than purely commercial assets. So setting up a community energy enterprise, is this a straightforward thing to do? Well, first, it's worth pointing out that there's a growing movement across the UK. This is taken from Community Energy England, latest State of the Sector report. There's 300 community energy organisations in England and Wales. There may well be one near you. There's double that in Scotland. So there's a lot of activity already happening within the community energy sector across the UK. So first question is there a community energy organisation near you? Get involved with Community Energy England or Community Energy Wales, or indeed Community Energy Scotland, and find out whether there's anybody near you that's already active. If not, maybe worth setting up one in your local area if you're so minded. But it will require specific focus around ensuring that there is long-term enthusiasm and commitment, a real clear sense of what it is that you want to achieve. Is just a couple of solar panels on the local village hall, or are you trying to move the local area to net zero? Very different approach, but it's important to understand what your aspirations are at the beginning, because that will influence the skills and experience that you need to make it work. And having been through this process on a number of occasions in setting up community energy organisations, community organisations more widely, often the people that are sitting around the table when you first have that initial idea aren't necessarily the people that you will need to turn that idea into practice. So a bit of honesty when you look around the table and say, are we the right people? Do we need to get other people involved? It's an important step in the process. And then pragmatism around what to focus on first. I'll talk a bit more about this shortly, but again, often come up with community energy organisations who want to, hydro is the kind of the lots of community organisations want to do, because they reasonably think it's really nice and it's pretty uncontroversial. Alternatively, the idea of having a massive wind turbine in the local area attracts lots of people. But it's worth thinking, well, what is doable to start off with? What's the simplest thing to do? Because that's the place to start, because in any community initiative, you want to be able to demonstrate action and change as quickly as possible, because that's what will enthuse people to get involved and stay involved. Rather, if you get involved with a hydro scheme, you could be doing something. Our project took 8 or 9 years to build. If that was all that we would have done, we would have lost people years and years ago. So what is it that we can do quickly? Let's focus on that. So opportunities for action. As some of you may know, we used to have a feed-in tariff which gave us subsidy for new renewables. Feed-in tariff closed last year. So the first question is, well, what projects are still financially viable? And that's a particular problem when you think, well, without the feed-in tariff, we are thinking, well, when we sell electricity to the grid, we are operating in the wholesale market where we're getting maybe 4 pence, 5 pence per kilowatt hour if we're lucky. That's not enough at the moment to make renewables projects viable, certainly at the scale that we're talking about. Very large scale might work, but small scale, very difficult. So what we need to start thinking about is how can we add value to that price? And the first thing to think about is, can we sell electricity directly to consumers? And the most obvious example of that is putting a solar panel on the roof of a school or business and selling electricity via private wire directly to that consumer. So instead of getting 4 or 5 pence per kilowatt hour, you can look at, well, they're paying 12 pence. Maybe we could give them a bit of a discount and we might get 10 pence per kilowatt hour. then it starts to get viable. If you could sell electricity directly to retail consumers, you and me, then we're well in the game. However, clearly we can't have private wire to all consumers. That would be ridiculous. Whilst we can do it on roofs of existing buildings or existing consumers, we can also do it on ground mount schemes or wind turbines next to industrial estates where the large consumers, and run a private wire for a short distance from your generating plant to the consumer, but it can't go very far because running cable like that is very expensive, not least the cable, but you have to end up paying all the landowners way leaves, and you get into ransom strips and all sort of business you don't want to have to deal with. So private wire is great, but it's limited. What we really need to be able to do is to what's called sleeve the electricity from our generating plant to consumers over the existing grid, often called peer-to-peer trading, where we sell from the generator directly to the consumer. There are regulatory and financial hurdles to overcome with that, but we and others are involved in pilots, and I'll come on to talk about why I think this is critical to the long-term model for community energy. But it's worth bearing in mind that we need to generate income from these projects. They need to be financially viable, so we need to think, where are we getting the money from? So what are still financially viable, where you can secure long-term minimum income streams, selling electricity direct to the consumer. And the first opportunity, start with solar roofs. It is the easiest thing to get going, the most straightforward, the least, well, one of the least controversial, not totally uncontroversial, but relatively straightforward. And increasingly easy from a planning perspective, with a lot of opportunities for permitted development. Other opportunities, a lot of community groups now are looking at trying to bring together local people and create a community voice, to create bulk purchase opportunities, to get discounts around domestic solar schemes, maybe around take up of green tariffs. And there's a whole separate discussion about when's a green tariff really a green tariff and when's it not a green tariff. Can talk about that in the discussion if people are interested, but not all green tariffs, not all renewable energy tariffs are equal. But importantly, from a community energy point of view, we need to be thinking about new business models. Just relying on solar roofs is not going to take us to where we need to be. So I'll illustrate that with some of the things that, as Bath and West, we're doing. So we're doing the obvious. We've initiated a Community Solar 2020 program where we are going out to our community to identify new roofs, and we've produced a solar roof spotters guide that local people are using to identify what would be a good roof. So we've provided, it's available on our website, provided a set of criteria. These are the things that you should be looking for. What makes a good solar roof? We're also looking at ground mount solar and wind projects, but with those at the moment, as I say, to make them financially viable, we need to secure a long-term power purchase agreement with a large consumer. And we're talking to our local authority as part of their procurement process to try and get a 10-15 year guaranteed income from them, which would go some way to offsetting the absence of the feed-in tariff. But new business models. So we've just started a feasibility study looking at community-owned EV charging network. So we're currently identifying sites for potential community charging. So particularly of interest to people who've not got off-street parking, but trying to create a community asset so that we can also, alongside that, build a community car club. So we're encouraging a reduction in car ownership and certainly car mileage through car sharing as well as electrification, because if we're just looking at replacing all petrol and diesel cars with electric cars, then it's not going to work. For a lot of resource issues, particularly around battery manufacture, again, we can cover in the discussion if that's of interest. Or I believe actually you've got a talk later on today, so maybe cover that then. Another business model we've been looking at, a project called Solar Streets. We've been looking at what's called demand shifting. So here we've got a house, and the little wiggly line represents what might be seen as a typical electricity demand profile during a day. So the first peak is in the morning, when everybody gets up, goes down when everybody goes to work. I'm talking generic terms here, and then back up in the evening when people come home and use electricity in the evenings. Now, we know if you stick solar panels on the roof, you start generating electricity in the middle of the day when people typically don't use it so much. Now, this in a microcosm is the problem around our energy transition. If we're going to get renewable electricity penetrating into our system much beyond the 40–50% point, we need to be balancing electricity far better. We need to be managing our peak load far better, and we need to be aligning with renewable generation far better. So in our Solar Streets project, we've been looking at, can we use battery storage to enable us to meet those peak demands from electricity generated during the day? And we've been working with a couple of streets and to install solar and battery, and then looking also at trying to work with householders about shifting demand from peaks to the daytime to maximize solar. And in our area, just shifting demand from evening to the middle of the day cuts carbon emissions by up to 50%. Not many people know that, but it's a fundamental kind of issue around the way the carbon intensity of electricity, particularly at peak times. So we're trying to shift that over there. We're trying to also do it in a way that builds a business model that would enable us to replicate and roll that out, that project out. The pilot's just coming to an end, and our conclusion is, at the moment, battery costs are too expensive to make this replicable, but we've learned a lot that we're feeding into our second project in this area, Flex Community, which is looking at demand side response from and automating demand shifting. So Solar Streets, we're encouraging people to shift demand through behavior change, and we got a lot of take up, but the enthusiasm waned over time because people's interest gets dissipated and goes everywhere, got people lives to lead. So Flex Community, we're working with a commercial provider who has a cloud-based system to help automate that, which raises that shift of demand, raises a whole host of issues around data management and third-party control, which we think community aggregation, which is the role we're playing, provides a critical role in building trust around those really important issues. That project's a European project just starting. And finally, the whole area around peer-to-peer trading. If we could make this work, it would make such a big difference. We could sell electricity to consumers at 9p rather than the 5p that we get from the grid. Then consumers get a benefit and we do as well. And we're just looking into that. And for me, that's where community energy ends up. Local energy for local people. That's the ultimate goal. So, as well as opportunities for new generation, opportunities for action, critically important around local democracy. Because if we're not influencing local communities through engaging with community forums, parish councils, neighbourhood plans, if we're not actively responding to consultations around the local plan for your local authority, we're not going to embed the planning regulations necessary to make wind in particular, wind turbines, a reality because of the planning constraints that have been put in at a national level. We're not going to get new development that's zero carbon unless we have really strong policies in our local plans. So it's a really critical issue for us, because if the people who want these things don't get involved, it will be decided by people who don't. And we're not going to get the change at a local level. So alongside that, we need to be championing new renewables projects. The silent majority need to become the vocal majority to outweigh the opposition that we often get to wind and sometimes get to solar. Ultimately, though, it's about word of mouth and talking to friends, family, neighbours, utilising those community networks to really start to build a sense of collective purpose around change. So community energy offers this local control, accountability, local presence and transparency, which we believe has the potential to build trust, awareness, and this sense of urgency through collective purpose in order to secure consent and, importantly, participation in systemic change. That's what community energy is about. And ultimately, we need to be integrating service delivery. So not just generation through community renewables, but also looking at supply through peer-to-peer trading and demand through consumer aggregation and energy efficiency. If we can integrate all of those things, then we're in a position to create a more than the sum of the parts approach, which we believe can really help speed the transition to net zero and also mitigate our risk and increase financial viability, because ultimately community energy is going to be financially viable if we can stack income streams, not just the sale of electricity, but also through referrals through the network, supply chain network, also through demand shifting and trading with the local grid operator. Lots of potential there, but there's complexity too. So I'm conscious of the time. There's lots of things that we need to put in place to enable community energy to flourish, both at central government and also regional and local government. But it comes down to enabling community finance, building regulatory systems that enable community energy to flourish, and building new business models. If we can get those things, and I think government and local government have key roles to play in all of that, then we can start to see community energy really start to flourish. So, summarise then, community energy offers an approach that can underpin change by building consent, trust and active participation. And I think without these attributes being fundamentally baked into the energy system in some way, whether it's through community energy or through some other mechanism, we're not going to see change delivered at the speed we need. So it's an appeal to all, really. Join this growing movement, promote community energy solutions, and start simple. Build on what is already there where possible. Utilise the building knowledge and experience that is out there. But get involved in local democracy. Don't just think about the kind of exciting new technologies and everything. Do the kind of less boring thing, the more boring things perhaps, and kind of the community meetings and the community forums and the neighbourhood plans and all of that stuff is going to create the fundamental foundation, building blocks to the exciting technology projects as well. So we need to create scale and impact, and we need to be able to mainstream finance, support new business models and regulatory recognition, as I was saying. At the heart of this, at the kind of fundamental thing, kind of selling point, if you like, of community energy is it's about putting people at the heart of the energy transition. If we forget the human dimension here and just focus on technology, it's not going to work. We need people kind of leading and at the heart of this whole process. Thank you. So, questions?
Thank you very much, Peter. That was great. Brilliant. So, well done, Peter. That was great. Thank you very, very much. We've got quite a lot of questions, although I can see a lot coming from the core team at Scientists Warning Europe. So I'm going to start with some of them that are not from the core team. Ken Huggins asks, what about using electric vehicle batteries as storage? So many cars sit unused for most of the time.
Yeah, no, well, that's going to be a fundamental part of it. It's not as straightforward as you might think. Domestic batteries at the moment are 4 kilowatt hour batteries, 5 kilowatt hour batteries. The battery in your car is 40 kilowatt hours, 50 kilowatt hours. And so the kind of, you've got a very powerful battery there. We've also got to manage DC, AC. So it requires technology to act as the interface between vehicle and grid. But it is everybody thinks that that will be a fundamental part of the transition. It's just going to be kind of probably 3-4 years before it becomes really mainstream, just starting on pilots at the moment. Nissan, the Leaf, and they've integrated vehicle to grid in particular circumstances, and there are some pilots going on around the country. But yeah, totally agree.
Great, thank you. We'll go up to one up here. Edred Whittingham asks, what's the first step for someone like me who doesn't have any relevant knowledge in the field?
First step would be to see if there is anybody locally that who might be able to help. So I'd find out whether there is a local community energy organisation. I'd also talk to your local authority and see if there's any information they have about local community energy action, because increasingly local authorities are playing a quite important role in convening local community action. So cast your net around locally to find other like-minded people and people with expertise, because they are normally out there. And then it might be worth thinking about potential sites. So if you go onto our website, there's, as I say, download the Solar Roof Spotter Guide. It gives some basic information about types of roofs that might be good. And it could be that your local school or whatever might be a good site. You could start talking to people. Is there interest there? Start talking to other people, because you don't need expertise to start building enthusiasm. You need expertise to understand whether a particular project is viable, but enthusiasm, you can start kind of generating that. So those would be my first suggestions, not knowing your area and where you are, of course.
And can I just add, Peter, to what you're saying as well, is get involved in the layers of local government. So talk to your local county councillor or town councillor about what they're doing. Join the parish council. I've said this a number of times in our talks. Often the parish councils are not full. If you join a parish council with an intention to get a community energy scheme going or declare a climate emergency, it's amazing how quickly you can get onto the council and do something. The other thing is, if you don't want to be on the council, all council meetings are public, even when they're doing them online. So you can attend the meeting, you have to be given time to talk, and you can ask, what's your parish council doing in relation to community energy schemes?
Yeah.
So, okay. Oh, and then, I mean, a question I asked earlier on in the chat, but is relevant, is looking at where to start. What is the smallest level of community energy scheme you've got experience of, and how did you make that financially viable?
So the smallest scheme we've got is 10 kilowatt solar panel on a school, small schools, infant school. That was viable because of the feed-in tariff. Now we're not looking at that small, to be honest. We're looking at things at 50 kilowatts and above, could potentially go down to 40 kilowatts if it's a really simple project to install. So scaffolding costs are very cheap, not got complex access issues. So if you think, well, 8 square meters per kilowatt, so 40 kilowatts is 320 square meters, which is sizable, but maybe kind of size of a tennis court. It's not kind of massive. So often get those sort of size roofs on large primaries, secondary schools, leisure centres, small businesses, local authority buildings. It would be really good to see, well, what's your local authority doing on their council offices and elsewhere? So yeah, that's the kind of immediate scale kind of criteria.
When have you got any examples of building schemes onto land that is not owned or, let's say, leased formally by the scheme, but maybe doing a profit share with the local landowner?
Yes, yeah. So we don't own any of the land that the schemes operate on. So we have lease arrangements with the landowner. So all the ground mounted schemes have lease arrangements where we pay an annual lease payment to the landowner, and it's better value for the landowner than they would be getting normally for that land. Obviously, there's issues about land use that we have to take care about, but the amount of land that we would need for solar is kind of very, very small percent if you looked at the whole land area of the UK. So there's not a food versus fuel issue here, but nevertheless, you wouldn't want to be putting it on grade 1 land. There's sufficient grade 3 and below land to look at solar. But so yes, lease arrangements, pay an income to the landowner.
Right. Okay. There's with telecoms towers, can telecoms towers and turbine towers be combined together?
No, unfortunately not. It's a very nice idea and wish that it was possible. But if you just think of the wind loading that you would have on a turning turbine, it would add significant pressure on a structure that wasn't designed for that loading. And also, yeah, you would have probably the telecoms people very concerned about interference with their mobile signals. So yeah, no, I don't think that's a possibility, unfortunately.
Okay, and just connected, Brian McGavin asks, 5G will impact adversely on local communities at local level, using much more energy with potentially harmful impacts on health and ecology without informed consent from local communities. Are you looking at this issue too?
Yes, in part, but I'd have to be honest, not in a focused way. It's something that we're aware of, that we're going to need to think about, particularly as we add the kind of the digitalization part of the decentralization, democratization and decarbonisation of the energy system. The digitalization bit is going to be looking very seriously at connection and 5G because of the benefit that 5G offers in terms of speed. But you're absolutely right, there are issues around 5G so there are going to be questions around the compatibility of kind of some of the things that we need to want to achieve with the available technology like 5G. So I'm not an expert in that area.
Right. Okay, thank you. Another question from Brian. Are you active on other aspects of sustainability at local levels and with local government? And you did touch on this, but just to maybe expand. So discouraging SUV purchase as they use so much energy, shops keeping doors wide open on cold winter days with hot air blasting out. Yes. You did actually mention car share schemes, so that's related.
Yeah, no, and it's really important. We do whatever we can to try and look at this in kind of as holistic way as possible. So we try and focus on biodiversity issues on our solar arrays. And we think about large solar arrays. Often people say, well, that's going to be kind of a problem from a kind of natural world point of view. But actually, the Wildlife Trust in our area helped us set up a separate community enterprise because they thought, and we agree, that solar arrays actually add biodiversity because they take land out of intensive agriculture and intensive treatment and enable wildflowers and biodiversity to flourish. So there are obvious win-wins, but there are some things that are a bit harder to focus on. And I think the point around transport is a key. I think a lot of people in the energy sector just think, well, we just need to be converting all our cars to electric, and we don't think that works. And actually, we think batteries generally there should be a hierarchy. We should be looking at demand shifting, demand reduction, demand shifting, and then using battery storage just to manage the kind of the balance. Otherwise, we're going to be investing lots of resource and rare earth metals like cobalt and lithium and all of the kind of sustainability issues that they raise unnecessarily. So, but you also mentioned energy efficiency. We're very keen to integrate demand reduction and heat loss prevention in homes. At the moment, there's not really a market for energy efficiency. The government's just launched the Green Homes grants. Hopefully they'll be extended beyond March. And for the first time in many years, there may be, hopefully will kickstart the market, but we're just looking at ways that we can help promote take up of those sorts of opportunities.
Great. You did mention local schemes, both neighbourhood schemes and at a district and county council level. Do you have experience of the neighbourhood planning schemes?
Yes.
And their effect? I mean, if you get in when they're being created, can they be used as a force for good and to get community energy schemes in place?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment we're in a situation where wind turbines are effectively very difficult to do onshore because of planning constraints that have been implemented at a national level, which basically mean that you have to either have demonstrate total community support, which is very difficult to do for any development, or show that wind turbines are kind of supported in either a local plan at a district and county level, or at a neighbourhood plan or parish plan level at a parish or town council level. So absolutely important for wind, essential for wind at either neighbourhood or local plan, but also any development, if you can get it into the neighbourhood plan, it will add material weight when you come to planning. So absolutely critical, and can't stress enough the importance of engaging with these community processes. It's going to be a fundamental part of getting this transition, getting the consent that we need for this transition.
And in fact, just to add to that, knowing very little about neighbourhood plans, but just in our parish council, a concerned resident came because somebody's planning something at the end of her garden, has made a number of pleas to the parish council. Now we have a group of 9 of us on a working party where we're intending to put in a local neighbourhood plan covering her issues and a lot of others, where we're even going to include the land from parishes around us who haven't put in neighbourhood plans. So actually it will have quite a big effect, but we're just in the planning stages. So imploring everybody, if you want to have an effect on these things, go and find out what the local council or community group is doing and press them into this. If they're not doing it, it can have a great effect.
Yeah.
Brian McGavin has asked, you say that not all green tariffs are equal. Can you explain?
Yes, we've got 8 minutes. Basically, it comes down to transparency and additionality. So the energy supplier that is providing the green tariff, the key question is, where is that electricity coming from? Can you name the actual generating plant that you have a contract or power purchase agreement from to buy the electricity? Or are you effectively just buying what are called renewable energy guarantees of origin, REGO certificates? So every generator, when they generate electricity, renewables, can produce a certificate, which is part of the accreditation process. There is a separate market for those REGOs to the market for electricity, which means that energy suppliers can buy those REGOs for peanuts, literally kind of pence, which means that they can then say at the end of the year, I've balanced all my electricity from these REGOs, and as far as Ofgem are concerned, that means I'm 100% renewables, which is why you get some renewable electricity suppliers who are providing unbelievably cheap electricity. And the question is, if it is so cheap, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. So you should be expecting to pay at least similar prices for renewable electricity, if not a little bit more. So the question is, look on the website, or ask the question, if it isn't on the website, where is the electricity coming from? If they can't say, then stay clear, because they're just playing the system. If they're actually supplying electricity directly from generating plant, they're adding value, additional value to the renewable energy market. So that, in a nutshell, is the kind. There's a lot more to say on that, but that's the kind of short version. Hopefully that makes sense.
It did. Maybe you could actually name positively a couple of those companies that are supplying them correctly.
Good Energy, Ecotricity. There are variations within those, which I don't have time to go from, which there's kind of shades of green, even for those that are kind of doing what I've just said. But Ecotricity, Good Energy are good. They tend to be more expensive. There are some that are coming onto the market that I'm just doing a little bit of work looking at, trying to assess the potential, their value, but that say that they're cheaper than Good Energy and Ecotricity, and are actually buying electricity directly from the source, which is what you would expect, because renewable electricity is coming down in price and is often competitive now with fossil fuels. So you wouldn't expect renewable electricity tariffs to be significantly higher. I think Good Energy have part of the problem is they're quite small, so you tend to pay more if a supplier is a smaller company than if they're a large company. So there are other factors. It's not just that they're profit taking, although for some it might be. So yes, yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. We've had a question from John Sharp. Do you think it's important that community energy schemes are regulated by the FCA when raising capital in order to give investors confidence?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. So we, as a community benefit society, are registered with the FCA. We are exempt from strict FCA regulation. If we were a commercial business that was raising funds through crowdfunding, we would have to be FCA regulated, or our share offer would have to be FCA regulated. I think there is an important question as to whether community schemes need to be regulated. Do we need that level of underwriting or confidence to build the market? Because FCA regulation is very expensive and is currently targeted at the larger kind of offers, commercial offers and share issues. So it's not really set up for community scale, which is why there's the exemption there. There are other, but the point that you make about giving investor confidence is critically important here. And there could be other ways that we could do it. So the Community Shares Unit, which is an initiative run by Co-ops UK, which is the association alongside government and various other NGOs. They have a standard mark, which as a community business you can apply for, and then you can it's a seal of approval, if you like, for your share offer, and that provides, they have criteria that you have to meet, which give investor confidence. But also, I think increasingly, one of the issues that I flagged up, we didn't have time to go into, we need to mainstream community investment. At the moment, it's kind of pigeonholed in the world of ethical investment, which is important, but it's a limited subsector of the wider investing market. We've seen a lot wider investment in our projects than just those people who would normally invest ethically. And they're doing that increasingly because for us, we've got a track record, which helps gives confidence. But for new businesses, community businesses, the introduction of things like the innovative ISAs, you may or may not be aware of this, kind of one of the last things that George Osborne did when he was Chancellor was introduce what's called an innovative ISA, which enables bonds, non-listed financial instruments to be integrated into an ISA wrapper and therefore get tax relief, which we've seen has been a major boost to mainstreaming bond investment. Share investment isn't eligible for it, but it's those sorts of initiatives which I think are going to be critical alongside building secondary markets for shares and bonds. So investment becomes more fluid, people can get their money back more easily than they currently can. So there are a number of ways that I think we can build investor confidence that fall short perhaps of the full FCA regulation, but we may need to go there, in which case hopefully the FCA will produce a process that won't cost us 20 to 30 grand plus to do.
If you could just make then a quick comment, because we're very near the end, on local authorities. A quick comment on you said previously local authority plans are not strong enough. So it'd be interesting to have a quick comment on that. And also, can local government do anything in relation to the local subsidies and tax changes you were talking about? Is there have you any experience of that?
Yes. So local plans, the local authorities have a number of kind of policy planning opportunities. So a lot of local authorities, 2/3 of local authorities have issued climate emergencies declarations and are now thinking, how can we leverage the various things to actually deliver? Local plan is one that's principally a planning document, kind of affects new housing development, new development of any kind, plus renewables. And if we can get positive policies there, then that's great. But they also have other policy areas around economic development, depending on whether they're a district, unitary or county, obviously have different remits. But there are lots of other policies which they're all looking to integrate climate emergency. The most forward-thinking local authorities, and there are a number of those in one of our local authorities, in fact, is looking to try and put climate emergency, climate change at the center of everything. So all policy has to bounce back off how is it going to impact on climate emergency, climate change. If it doesn't have a positive impact, we don't do it. That's that's a major shift, but some local authorities are taking it, and that's the direction that we need to go in. In terms of the tax and financial things, there are some opportunities. So some local authorities are looking at council tax. Parish councils are looking at their precept. The precept is an interesting thing because actually, whilst it's a lot smaller, there's a lot more flexibility around the precept and how it's kind of set than there is at the local authority level. So a number of parish councils that we're aware of are looking at, can we increase the precept in order to generate funds? But local authorities are looking at council tax. Can people get council tax discounts if they've done good stuff in their property, for example? There are a number of things that they can do, but ultimately the tax and things are limited. That's really central government. However, there are lots of other things that local authorities, particularly wider public sector, the local economic partnerships. Government is looking to the local economic partnerships to drive a lot of this agenda increasingly. So they're all developing industrial strategies. The metro mayors are looking at devolution, and there's a lot of scope there to integrate climate change into those strategies. And I think, finally, from a community energy point of view, we need to be moving to look at building on the principally voluntary sector initiatives that community energy is at the moment, to begin to, I don't want to say professionalize, because that gives the wrong impression of the voluntary sector. It's not meant as a derogatory thing, but to build employment and vocational opportunities within the community energy sector, because without that, we're not going to get the longer term consistency and focus from the community energy sector, because voluntary input for important, critical though it is, it tends to come and go as people's enthusiasm comes and goes naturally. And so quite often, if we just see community energy as a voluntary thing, it's not going to deliver at the scale we need. So LEPs and local authorities can play a critical role around sector development, looking at apprenticeships, looking at vocational training, looking at sector development, building peer-to-peer mentoring, putting community groups in touch with other community groups. There's lots of value that local authorities can add in creating the conditions within which this change can take place.
Great, thank you. Very conscious that we run over time, so going to ask if you could begin one or two more questions with really short answers, please. Bill Dowling has asked, do you find it easier to get 50 people to invest £1,000 in a community scheme rather than to persuade 10 people to invest 5,000 on solar panels on their roof? I'd actually add to that, it's probably, is it easier to get £5,000 raised in small amounts of money from the community, whatever it is, compared to getting people to invest the £5,000 themselves in a scheme?
I'll try and answer that quickly. Maybe. Our experience has been, our minimum fundraise was £500 initially, and so we found relatively easy to get multiple thousands, and our average investor to start off with was about £3,000–4,000. However, we've now kind of reduced that minimum down to £100. We're thinking about taking it down to £50 to get more inclusivity. We've just started doing that. Well, last year we started doing that, and we're starting to see more come in. But still, people are investing more than £100, even though we've reduced it. So it's an interesting. We need to do more community engagement and to get to not the usual suspects, those people that are already interested in environment. That's where we've been very successful in raising finance. We need to get to the people who are just thinking, oh, I'm wondering what this is all about, and that's going to be the big challenge. So when we get there, then I think you may be right.
Okay, then looking at a very topical one, COVID-19 and its effect, and what are your views on the future over the next couple of years for community energy schemes, taking into account COVID-19? So taking into account the fact that the country is going to be massively in debt, that taxes will have to go up at some point. Is that actually going to be a problem for community energy schemes, or is the opportunity to provide community energy directly to people locally and give them a return on their money actually going to be more attractive?
I'm hoping it's the latter. And just one concrete example of that, we're looking at developing a project that acknowledges the fact that commercial businesses, large employers rather, are outsourcing their carbon emissions into the community as people work from home. So rather than their scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions from offices, it's all in the community. And large employers, I mean, we're talking to a university where rather a third of their employees, staff, are going to be working from home, a third are going to be pitching from home in office, and only a third are going to be in the office. So they're totally revising on a long-term basis their working arrangements. So we're developing a program to look at how community energy can offset those carbon emissions that are being outsourced into the community, and therefore develop a relationship with those businesses, those employers, to sell electricity directly from our local generating system. So that's an example where I think we can kind of utilize this shift for benefit, for good.
Great. Right. Well, I was sort of hoping you were going to fall on that side, and let's hope that that happens. Pete, thank you very, very much for what you've done today for us. The recording will be going out. I did notice somebody worrying about the fact we didn't have very many people. We will have this recorded and we will post it online, so we hope a lot more people will get access to the advice. And I would say to the assembled company that we in the Hazelmere Parish Council have invited Pete to come along and talk to our climate emergency working party, which is about 10 or 15 people locally. And our whole intention is to get Pete to disseminate the advice he's just given us and then make it more specific to our local area. And there's no reason why that shouldn't be done in some of the other areas. I noticed other people mentioning places. Was it Insham was mentioned further up? Is to come back, contact Pete. I'm sure he's happy to be contacted directly or through Scientists Warning Europe if there were local parishes or other councils or local groups that could be persuaded to do things and impart his knowledge and experience to them. So please take advantage of that.
My contact details were on the last slide, and I'm happy to talk to people. I just put a caution, obviously, and there's only so many of those things I can do. I need to focus on our area. There are other people out there as well, lots of other people. And as I said, there are 300 community energy organisations in England and Wales. There may well be one near you. So go local wherever you can.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Peter. Absolutely brilliant. And let's hope we get a lot more of these schemes going in the very near future. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody.